Please extend a warm New Canaan Society welcome to your friend, our leader this morning, Paul Michalski.
Thank you, brother. Thanks, brothers. Good to be here. It's kind of a fill-in, right? This was an open date that we thought was going to get filled. It didn't get filled, and I had this talk in my back pocket for just one of these days when something fell through. So let me just pray to get us started, Lord. Thank you for these brothers. Thank you that they showed up this morning, Father. Thank you for the lives in this room and the privilege that we each have of having a front row seat in the lives of other men. Pray, Father, that you would just guide my lips and my tongue this morning, Lord, that my mind would be open, my heart would be open to whatever you have me to say, Lord, and that men's hearts would be open to it, Father. Thank you for loving us so much. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So I call this talk Looking Back and Living Forward, Following Jesus by Looking for God. There's a great quote from Soren Kierkegaard. It's quite true that what philosophy says, that life must be understood backwards, but then one forgets the other principle, that it must be lived forwards. So I want to look back first before looking forward. Psalm 105:5. Remember the wonders he has done, his miracles and the judgments he pronounced. The Israelites were constantly forgetting what God did. They were constantly asking God to remember his promises to them. And the Hebrew word for remember is zakar. A good friend of NCS and a good dear friend of mine, Skip Moen, who was a Hebrew scholar, Skip writes, and I thought this was fascinating, the Hebrew concept of time is like a man rowing a boat. He sees where he has been, but the future is toward his back. This is the reason that our past history with God is so important. Skip goes on to say, if we have the right markers in the past, we do not need to see the future direction of our rowboat. By keeping on a course that uses these markers as bearing points, we know that we are going in the right direction even if we cannot see where we are going. It's not necessary to see the course of the future because our future is merely an extension of the same line that we have taken with God in the past. Those of us who know God will know that we are on the right course because God's faithfulness marks the way that we have already come, and God does not change course. Those of us who are not using God's markers for our course will have no idea if we're rowing in the right direction. We will have history that shows us a faithful, straight line. We will end up trying to row a boat in a fog. There's a quote often attributed to Albert Einstein: there are only two ways to live your life. One is through as though nothing is a miracle. The other is as though everything is a miracle. I personally choose the second. So I want to look back for God's hand working through human angels on my journey. And as I'm doing this, I invite you to start thinking about your life and how God's hand has reached out through angels in your journey. And he can do this through various ways. Psalm 91, God will send them, for he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. Hebrews 13:2, they might be in disguise. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. And they will minister to you. Mark 1:13, and he was in the wilderness 40 days, being tempted by Satan, and he was with the wild animals, and the angels were ministering to him. So how do they help? They open paths. They close paths. They plant seeds. They overcome obstacles. They provide clues. They give guidance. They deliver blessings. They teach lessons, and they pray for us. Oswald Chambers, his book, Utmost for His Highest, which has been sort of a real anthem for NCS, says, never believe that the so-called random events of life are anything less than God's appointed order. Be ready to discover his divine designs anywhere and everywhere. So there are three ways that you might go home after this talk. One reaction might be, wow, Paul's led a blessed life. I wish I did. Second might be, wow, what an arrogant jerk, bragging about all those angels that were in his life. I hope you picked this one. Wow, God, please help me see the angels who've guided my life. So a brief snapshot of today. Charles did it in much more entertaining fashion. Married to Lisa, it'll be 32 years in July. We have two joy-filled children, James and Annie, 27 and 25. I've been showing up at NCS for over 22 years now. Integris is my vocational practice, a niche legal practice, guiding organizations on how to build a culture that aligns with their Christian faith so that the owners and the leaders are actually living out their faith through their entire life, in their work and in their business. And backing that up is a personal vocational mission statement which aligns with what Integris is that Charles read. The background was a 23-year legal career on Wall Street, and with Harvard and Harvard College behind that. So that's the snapshots, and you'll begin to see how the angels kind of guided and helped toward that. These are some of what I'm going to call, we know BFFs are best friends forever, but I'm going to call them BFAs, my but-for angels. And these are just a few of them that I'll be talking about. These are people who, but for them, my life would have taken a different course. So first is the Catholic bishop. I was 8 years old. I was being confirmed in the Catholic Church. And at the end of the ceremony, we were all lined up in the back of the church. And the bishop came back to congratulate us. And he went down the line and he said, congratulations, congratulations, congratulations. And he got to me and he looked me in the eye and he said, congratulations, you're going to be a priest one day. Congratulations, congratulations, congratulations. And I thought to myself, no, I'm not, because at 8 years old, I knew I wanted to be a lawyer. And I remember thinking, they have nothing to do with each other. And I believe that was a marker that began now a 50-plus year journey to what Integris is, which is helping men understand that they have everything to do with each other. And that as a lawyer, I am also a priest, and each of you are priests and missionaries in your work. But for that bishop, I might have never understood this calling that has been on me since the age of 8 years old. The Jewish dentist, he was my uncle, and he planted a seed in my mind. As a kid, he said, don't get married until you're 32, before you're 32 years old. Sow your oats, build your career, don't get hooked up in a marriage till you're 32 years old. And that thing stuck in my head. And there were women who I was dating, and the relationships were getting pretty serious, and they were going on, and I'm not even close to 32, and didn't take them forward. I met my wife at 31 years old. But for that uncle, I might have never married her, and there would be no James and Annie. I think God had her in mind. He knew when her path was going to cross my path. The Jewish industrialist. When I was in high school, and at 8 years old, in addition to deciding I wanted to be a lawyer, at 8 years old I decided I wanted to go to Harvard College and Harvard Law School. I don't know why. I'm the first in my family to go to college, and we didn't know any lawyers. But I did. I got into Harvard College. But I wasn't going to go because of the financial package and the burden that it was putting on my parents. And then one day the phone rang, and it was the man who owned the company that my father was a plant manager in a car antenna factory. And this was the guy who owned the company. And he called me to congratulate me and to tell me that there were many reasons to go to Harvard, and there were reasons not to go to Harvard, but one of the reasons not to go should never be financial. And that the reason for his call was to tell me that if I chose to go there, that he would make sure it was never a financial burden on my parents. And they used to get a check every Christmas, a personal check from him to help cover my tuition. But for that man, I might have never attended Harvard, never pursued Cravath. My whole life may have taken a different tack. The sympathetic gatekeeper. My guidance counselor told me that I was wasting my time applying to Harvard, that I was wasting my $25 application fee because they don't accept kids from small farming communities in upstate New York, and that I should set my sights on the schools in the area that everybody else went to. Well, I got in, and I met my admissions officer after I had gotten in. This woman had come to Harvard. She started working in the admissions office a year before I applied. She left 2 years after I got in. She was from a small farming community in upstate New York. But for that angel, my life might have taken a very different path. The Christian expat lady, when my wife and I were living in London, we decided to go back to church when we had our first child, and we were raised in a Catholic tradition. We went to the Catholic church, and unfortunately, the priest was Nigerian, and you could only understand 1 out of every 3 words that he said, and we didn't know where else to go. And she said, "We need to find something else," and we didn't know what anything else was. A woman chases her down outside of a supermarket and introduces herself. She says, "Hi, my name's Elizabeth. I live in your neighborhood. I'm an expat too. I've seen you around. I just want to introduce myself." That night she drops a note in our post box to a garden party at an Anglican church a block from our house. My wife goes to the garden party. She attends that church. It turns out to be one of the only spirit-filled Anglican churches in London. The vicar and his wife were the creators of the Alpha Course, and Lisa takes the Alpha Course from the woman who named it the Alpha Course. And thus her faith journey began with that woman who chased her down. But for that, it's not clear that we would still be married, because that was the faith foundation that she had. The atheist lawyer. We were married for 32 years, but that is a miracle story in and of itself. Because in 2003, I realized that my marriage was disintegrating. My wife's words to me were, when I asked her if something was wrong, she said, "I don't know where to start, I'm not happy, and I can't go on like this." And I just knew there was something really, really deep in that, much deeper than those words suggested. And one of the things I did was I cried out to God to help me, because I didn't know what to do in that moment. And he led me to the New Canaan Society. One of the first people that I went to after she said that to me was a partner of mine, a legal partner, who had been the first person. He interviewed me on campus. He was the first person I worked for, and he and I ran our London office for 5 years together. He was sort of a father figure. And I went to him, and I asked him for advice for my marriage, and he said, "I really can't give you much advice. The only thing I can tell you is I got divorced 20 years ago, and it's one of the only regrets in my life is that she asked me to leave the house, and I did, and I think I made it too easy." He said, "So if I have any advice to you, it's just don't leave." And so I never left. And it gave God the power and the time to heal our marriage. But for this guy, I might have never been at Cravath, but we might well have been divorced back in 2004. The praying ladies. Some of you guys know the story of NCS. NCS, people say it started in 1995 when a bunch of guys started meeting in Jim Lane's house. It actually didn't start in 1995, I don't think. It started 15 years earlier, when a group of women at St. Paul's, Darien, began to pray every week that God would move in the hearts of the men of New Canaan. For 15 years, these women prayed every week that God would move in the hearts of the men in New Canaan. And when they heard that these men had begun to meet, they assigned a woman every Friday to drive back and forth in front of the Lane house praying. And Jim never knew about that until years later. But for those praying ladies, there might not be an NCS, and I might be divorced, and I might not know Jesus. The book table lady. So after I cried out to God to help me, about a week later, my wife was serving at a book table at our school, and She was sitting next to a woman she didn't know. And for whatever reason, she opened up to this woman and told her what was going on in our marriage. And she said to her, well, I'm going to pray for a miracle in your family. But do you think your husband would be interested in this Christian men's group that meets in New Canaan? And my wife quite rightly said, no, but knock yourself out. The next day was homecoming at the kids' school. In a crowd of thousands of people, we happened to bump into this same woman who we had never seen before. And she told me about the New Canaan Society. And I Googled it. And the only thing that came up at the time was Jim Lane's eulogy for David Bloom, the NBC reporter who died in Iraq. He came to faith through NCS. And in it, Jim said, it's men getting together to help each other become better husbands and fathers and leaders. And I thought, well, I certainly could use that. And that's how I ended up showing up at NCS, through this book table lady. The Marxist priest. Some of you know him as B.J. Weber. When I first showed up to NCS, B.J. would take people into the back and he would tell them what NCS was, and he would describe himself, and he would say at one point he was a Marxist and all these other different things. But B.J. ended up leading me to Jesus and to a relationship with Jesus, and he counseled Lisa and I for several months. So, but for this angel of B.J. Weber, I might have never found Jesus, and we might be divorced right now, and our kids might have grown up in a broken home. The Honduran nanny. We had a nanny. She didn't know what was going on, but she knew something was wrong in the house. And we learned only later that she would pray over our children and pray over the home every day. She was a believer. We didn't even know that. But this woman, so for this entire period of what was happening between Lisa and I, she was praying over our kids, for protection of our kids and for our home. But for that nanny, for Doobies, my life may have taken a very different course. The Danish FX trader, who you might know as Preben Andersen. Preben was an NCS guy. Preben is an eccentric believer. He is absolutely sold out to the Lord. You usually see him in a white suit with a white Jesus hat and his big white beard. But Preben taught me to really believe in Jesus' promises, that those promises are real, that we can lean on them like a shepherd leans on a staff. And there were 5 promises that I leaned on through the time that our marriage was in this turmoil. It was, okay, it says in this book, Malachi, I hate divorce, saith the Lord. He says he will love me. He loves me unconditionally. He'll never leave me or forsake me. He'll never let me go through something I can't handle, and nothing is impossible with God. And I believed those promises because Preben showed me that I could believe those promises. And when Preben told me to go home and pray about a passage that had come to him in Jeremiah, and I did, and he said, oh, by the way, open the door to your house and invite Jesus in because he's alive and he's real. And I went home, and it was a Friday at 10 a.m. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't asleep. I went out, and I said, oh, I got to do that door thing. I prayed over the passage, and I went out to our side door, and I went to open the door, and when I closed my eyes, there was a 7-foot white figure outside the door with his hands raised. When I opened my eyes, I couldn't see him, but when I closed my eyes, I realized I could see everything. I let him in the house, and he walked through the house, through every room. Our kids were upstairs with this nanny, and he walked in the room, and they said, oh, hi, Daddy. I'm like, okay, they don't see him. And he walked through every room of the house, and when we came back to my office, and I collapsed into my chair, and I closed my eyes, I saw him. He was standing right in front of me, and I just fell on the floor and wrapped my arms around his ankles and wept. And Preben, I reported that the next week that the passage spoke to me, but it really showed me that God is real, that this is real, real, real stuff. But for Preben, my faith would be nowhere it is today. The evangelical banker, we know him as Jim Lane. Too easy to say, but for Jim, we wouldn't be here today, right? But for Jim, I might not have found Jesus. Our marriage might have been falling apart. might not have met so many other of the angels. But it was also in November of 2004 when it announced at NCS that Jim had checked himself into rehab. That actually triggered God turning Lisa's heart around in 24 hours. When men told me it was hopeless, she had filed for divorce, men told me it was hopeless and impossible, that I should just move on with my life. And God would always show up in those moments and say, no, keep believing my promises. But it was Jim's checking into rehab that actually started this 24-hour turnaround in her heart. The Floridian prophet, David Wagner. David Wagner was a fixture at NCS, and he would come and he would prophesy for men, and he would come to the retreats. He would go in a room, and you could sign up for 15 minutes of time with David. And I was prophecy, come on, give me a break. I was not really, I not believe in this stuff. And somebody said, no, do it, just sign up for your 15 minutes, you know. At the time, we were running this marriage course. So one of the things that when God turned her heart around and she took the leap of faith that he could actually restore a marriage, I was really committed. One of the books that had a huge impact on my life was a book called Love and Respect by Emerson Eggerichs. I have 10 copies of it. They're free if anybody would like a copy of that book. And I was determined we were going to try to get Emerson to come and do his 3-day marriage conference in Connecticut. We ended up getting him to come. We had 27 churches participate. It was done through NCS. We had 900 people show up in Stanford for a 3-day Christian marriage conference. But when we were trying to get these churches on board, there was a couple of really important churches we wanted to get. And while I was in my 15-minute prophecy session, David said, the Lord is saying that you are going to get some good news. And literally at that moment, my phone started to vibrate in my pocket. After the prophecy session, I went outside. It was a voicemail. It was a voicemail from the key church we were trying to get saying, we're on board. And it buzzed when he was saying we're going to get good news. But from that moment, other prophetic words have been spoken, and I actually pay attention now. So David changed the way that I actually believe in prophetic words from the Lord. The charismatic doctor, Dr. J, who was another NCS brother. Dr. J delivered a prophecy to me in 2008, and he said, the Lord has told me that you're to start a Christian law firm for whom greed is not the creed, serving clients for whom greed is not the creed. I ignored it for 6 years, but it was the foundation of what became Integris. The Catholic CEO. In 2011, I got a phone call from a guy I had met at a Trinity Forum event. We met, we had breakfast, we had lunch. We never had any contact for 5 years. Nothing, not an email, not a phone call. Out of the blue, he calls me and he says, hey, I don't know what you're up to. I'm running a company as a CEO on a contract basis. We could use someone with your skill set. Do you want to hear more? I said, sure, I'll listen. We went, we talked about our faith journeys. He told me what this was. And I said, I have one more question, Vic. I said, we haven't talked in 5 years. Why the heck did you call me? He said, I have no idea. Your name came into my head and I couldn't get it out. And I worked for him. I worked for them from April to December 31st. It generated some income, and there was a life lesson that came into that. But for that, I might not trust in God's provision, and I might have abandoned Integris at the time. But it showed me how God can show up anytime, anywhere. The faith-driven entrepreneur, his name is Henry Kasner. I met Henry at a meeting in Chicago that I didn't want to go to. Jim had told me, hey, we're part of these marketplace ministries call us every year, and they ask us to go to this meeting of ministry leaders, and since you do our strategic partnerships, do you want to go? I said, let me think. Chicago on my own nickel to meet with a bunch of ministry leaders? No, not really. And then I looked at my calendar and I said, well, I have time. I'm going to go. I went. And it was all about a guy who wasn't even supposed to be here. Henry showed up. Henry's a business guy. We really connected at that. And following that meeting, he and I got on the phone and we talked. And he said, you need to meet this other guy, Dave Blanchard. I met Dave Blanchard, and that got me involved in Praxis. and talking to young entrepreneurs about integrity, which led to a lot of the substance of what Integris ended up becoming about. I might have not been involved in praxis, might not have met other angels in the movement, and might not have really fleshed out a lot of what I'm doing right now if not for showing up in Chicago and meeting this guy who wasn't even supposed to be there, at least from what I knew. The Princeton exorcist, Ken Fish. I was invited by Christian Union one weekend to a spiritual warfare training that they were doing for their staff. Lisa was at a retreat. The kids were at camp. I thought, oh, what the heck? This sounds interesting. I don't know anything about this spiritual warfare. It was deliverance. Oh my gosh. You know, when Ken and the audience were all believers in full-time Christian ministry with Christian Union, when Ken invited the Holy Spirit into the room, demonic presences and oppressions on these people started to manifest. I watched him cast out of one young woman, probably 27 years old, who was there with her husband, and she was a ministry staff person, at least 27 different demons. And I'm talking about the kind of stuff where, you know, he engages the demon, and out of this young 27-year-old girl comes sounds, and he would re-engage her. But I came out of that conference with two realizations. Evil is not just kind of out there. Evil is real, and it's personified, and they are ontological beings. And we are in a spiritual battle, but more importantly, God is absolutely sovereign, because what he showed us was, if you know your authority, they know you know, and they cannot not obey Jesus. That our King is the King. The Greenwich therapist, Steve Gilbert, he invited me to a retreat at We Want More House in Bridgeport. And it was at that retreat that God gave me my personal mission statement, which became the mission statement of Integris. And finally, the solo practitioners, two NCS guys, Michael Wojtek and Peter Hauser. When Dr. J gave me that prophecy about starting a law firm, I ignored it for 6 years. And the way that God brought me to it was, I went to pray, and he said, yes, I want you to do that. And he gave me two names, Michael and Peter. And I ignored it for 2 years. I didn't tell anybody except Lisa, and I wrote it down. And 2 years later, Michael calls Lisa and says that he and Peter are thinking of starting a Christian law firm, and did she think that I would have any interest in joining their conversation? How crazy. And they stepped out, but that began what was Integris. So more importantly, very quickly, to finish up, living forward, because none of this is it's not useful unless you see how do we live forward with it. So what are the lessons? Zakar actually does not just mean remember, it means to act in the remembrance. To zakar is to employ your hands and feet and lips to engage in whatever action that remembrance requires. So living forward is not living in the past, but remembering the past and taking the lessons from the past to inform our next steps, not going back to Egypt, but burning the bridge. It's the Hebrew rowboat metaphor. Cravath was my biggest Egypt. It was money, it was prestige, it was identity. What's your Egypt? Is there something in your past you need to cut out and you need to not try to keep going back to? Forget your Egypt and move forward. So what did I learn from the journey? I told you, in my marriage, God hates divorce. Nothing is impossible with him. Marriage stories always have three versions: his version, her version, and the truth. Commitment, when God calls, burn the bridge and move forward. Trust, don't forget in the dark what God told you in the light. Obedience, God is not a vending machine. But if he opens a trail for you, if he opens a rabbit trail, follow that rabbit trail. And that's what happened in that meeting in Chicago. It made no sense, but I didn't see around the two corners to what he really had in mind. Follow the trail even if you don't see a rabbit. Provision, what I learned from that call from Vic that resulted in working for him for several months was that in prayer was that a faucet is not a source of water. It's a distribution mechanism. for water from a vast reservoir somewhere. A job is not a source of provision. It's a distribution mechanism that God can use. He is our provider. Don't give an employer the power to think that they are actually the source of your provision. And believe that the Lord can turn on and turn off distribution mechanisms any time He wants, any place He wants, and His promises to provide. Perseverance. I don't know if you guys remember Chuck Yeager, the guy who broke the sound barrier. Oh, you know, I did some research on it, and Chuck Yeager was not the first person to try. The difference is that apparently when you get close to the sound barrier, the plane would begin to shake so violently that it felt like it was going to break up and fall apart. The difference between Yeager and the other test pilots was that they all gave up when the plane started to shake. Yeager pushed through, and when he broke the sound barrier, it was utter peace and quiet. And I think, men, we give up in the red zone. We are on the 5-yard line, and God's about to do something, and it just hurts too much. And people tell us, stop hurting, just give up. It's not going to change. Persevere. Contentment. I remember one day realizing that all of a sudden I was viewing life as there are no worse things in life. There are just things I don't quite understand why God let them happen. I don't yet understand. Purpose. I try to ask to what end. Find a bigger purpose in your work. Understand your real motivations. Everything should end in to glorify God, no matter what your work is, no matter what we're doing. That's the only purpose for which we were put here on this planet. Grace. Tim Keller, I learned from Tim Keller when he said there is no plan B. How arrogant is it of me to think that I could screw up God's plan for my life? Like that I could do something that God would wake up and say, I can't believe Paul did that. That messes everything up. Guys, there's no plan B. He's got you. Just keep doing the right thing. And grace for others. Came from a Brene Brown book, where she wrestled with this idea that everybody is doing the best they can. I had a hard time with that. But I finally came around to realizing that everyone is doing no matter, given all the givens, if you believe that everybody's doing the best they can, it may not be good enough, and they may still need to go to prison. They still need to be locked up. They may still need to be whatever. You may still have to create boundaries in your life, but to give them the grace of recognizing, I don't understand. I can never understand why they are doing what they're doing right now, but I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt that they're struggling and doing the best they can. My story isn't the story. It's just my story. Spiritual, it's all spiritual. Evil is real, and God is sovereign. Disordered words, they do damage. Work-life balance, don't get sucked into it. I think it comes straight from the pit of hell. Because what it says to you is that work is an oppositional force to life. And that by reducing work, you increase life. That's not God's design. Work is essential to your humanity. It's essential to us living out being made in God's image of a productive and creative working God. And yet our culture sucks us into this notion that the perfect life is to reduce work to zero and just go down to Naples and play golf all day long. And you are just giving up your humanity. Disordered priorities do damage. My priorities at the time in our marriage, if you'd asked me, were work, because I was raised believing that if I was a good producer, a provider, I was by definition a good husband and a good father. That didn't work really well. My kids would have been next. Wouldn't my wife want my kids to be next? And then she got whatever was left, and God was really nowhere in that. And it needed to be completely flipped around. God first, her second, kids next, and work fourth. But if God is first, I think He wants me to actually succeed in these things. Presence, live in today, be present to what God has. Don't future trip into anxiety about things that may never happen. And don't wait until tomorrow. There's a saying that I learned in the course of this that was, our today is robbed by our expectation of a tomorrow. Imagine what you would do if you learned you had 6 months to live, particularly in the relationships in your life. and then go do it, because we don't know we have tomorrow. I lost a college roommate who nobody was going to come to our reunion. We weren't going to go to our reunion. We did go, all of our rooming group. 2 weeks later, healthy guy. He was in a bike club at church. They would go biking every Sunday, and on Sundays they would gather in a shopping plaza in the parking lot. He had gotten there early. He was just rolling around the parking lot, and he bumped into a concrete barrier, flew off his bike, hit his head, and they pulled the plug 2 days later. Right, guys? We don't know we have tomorrow. And finally, integrity. Follow the example of Daniel. Do the right thing regardless of personal cost. And run toward. Just think about, are you running toward something in your life, or are you running away from something? And if you're running toward, what is it? Standing still. Just wait on God's timing. Don't birth an Ishmael and don't give up. God is with us, brothers. I'll read this. Then Elijah prayed and said, O Lord, please open his eyes that he may see. So the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elijah. Where are you in your journey? I just encourage you to look back. Do an inventory of your but-for angels. God, I believe God has been with every one of you. If you look back and just see where he's been, and then live forward. Are you longing for an Egypt? What are the markers for your navigation? Are you running from something, or are you running to something? Because if you're running from, any two will do. And stand. Don't force the vision, but wait for God. Thanks, guys.